RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOpsAF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of RevOps AF, the podcast where we talk to people who are RevOps AF about things that are RevOps AF. I am your co-host, Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 16,000 plus people from all over the globe. And today we are sitting down with one of those 16,000 plus people, Mark Lerner, the Director of Growth Marketing over at DealHub, which is a complete quote to revenue platform. We are going to be talking all about this new book that Mark has written and DealHub has launched called RevOps Rewired, which is Rethinking Revenue for the Digital Age. And so, Mark, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey, and then I can start peppering you with some questions on the book.
Awesome. Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Matt. It's nice to be on this side of the
I was going to say, you're normally on the flip side for your own RevAmp podcast, right?
Right. So it's kind of a treat. So I appreciate it. My background is really in the world of B2B SaaS, mostly through kind of the marketing organization, but over time taking on more and more operational tasks. And that has kind of compounded over the years. Entered the CPQ space about 4 or 5 years ago at a different CPQ vendor and worked there. And now for a few years, and now I'm at DealHub and really excited about DealHub as a solution. You know, the community of amazing folks that are part of our user base and really the future that we're kind of building. But, you know, the DealHub's kind of core focus is on this idea that in order for a CPQ to be powerful enough to meet the kind of most complex use cases, you don't have to kind of give up on usability and adaptability. You don't have to, you know, trade. There's no trade-off necessary there, which I think is there's kind of this false impression that that's the case. That's my journey of how I got here. But, you know, in terms of the book, I'm happy to chat about it because it really does dovetail around community, around, you know, being on the other side of the microphone, and how that, you know, how it all came about.
Yeah. So the book is called RevOps Rewired, which I think is very fitting. And you and I were talking a little bit before we hit the record button on why the book was written. So let's start there, because I know even in the past 4.5 years since starting RevOps Co-op, the community, RevOps has certainly changed a lot. It's evolved, and the market and the environment around it has certainly changed a lot as well. So I think RevOps Rewired is a very fitting sort of title, but let's start there. Why did you decide to write this in the first place?
Yeah, so, you know, when I started at DealHub early on, I was kind of approached to be the host of the podcast, which, you know, Matt and I and anyone that hosts a podcast, you know, may make it seem easy, but at first it's certainly a bit uncomfortable and awkward. But it was really one of the most gratifying experiences, because what most people don't tell you is that you get to invite the people that you want to learn from and get to pick their brain and kind of learn things that fill in the gaps that you don't have. And so it turned out to be a gratifying experience. But I started noticing trends and similarities in almost all of the conversations. They would kind of cover a few core things. And over time, it became very clear to me that things have changed a lot, right? And they continue to change. And it seems that the pace of that change has been increasing. And when I was reflecting on it and looking back on these episodes, it really became clear that there were these three kind of converging shifts, paradigm shifts that happened basically right on top of each other. And those are COVID, which I think is the obvious one, right? It just like everyone was sent home one day and they're like, you know, you got to work from home now. The whole world shut down. There was this kind of initial fear that every company would go out of business. And then, at least in the SaaS world, in the tech space, there was this kind of weird, kind of inverse, very, very positive kind of effect, but partially from low interest rates, partially because people were buying tools to figure out how do we work from home, how do we make this work. And I think that also put RevOps as a role in greater importance. Then we had, the tap began to get shut off in terms of that easy money, and there was a huge kind of the wave kind of the tide came in, so to speak, and a lot of companies were washed out. There was a lot of layoffs, and there was a lot of uncertainty created from that, and we're still, I think, dealing with that. And then the third one, which we all know and is kind of the thing that everyone talks about and has for the last 2-3 years, is AI. So it's like the emergence of it as a tool that mere mortals can actually utilize, right? You don't necessarily need to be a machine learning engineer to use it anymore, and that totally changed the game and changes in ways that we are continuing to see. So those kind of three emerging shifts happened all at once, and it completely upended everything. And the conversations I was having with people were always around dealing, kind of adapting to one or all of these things. And the overall feedback was that things are changing, things will always change. You cannot rely on resting on your laurels, assuming that what happened yesterday is going to happen tomorrow, and that there needs to be this kind of flexibility and adaptability within the role and within the mindset, and that is how you kind of thrive in this world. And I thought that was a lesson that was really important for a lot of folks.
Yeah, 100%. And so let's start with the beginning point that you mentioned, where COVID was beginning and we had kind of cheap, free money. What did the revenue function and revenue operations look like during that time? Because I want to start there and then take us through the evolution and the changes that we've done, which seems really fast. I don't know if fast is the right word, but it seems like a lot to cram into a really short period of time. Sure. Like 4 or 5 years ago, I was apparently wiping down all of the groceries that were getting delivered to my house, thinking that was going to somehow prevent and help COVID. And now here we are later, and I don't even remember actually the feelings of that time anymore. It seems like it was so long ago. But like you said, that's happened. Then we've had the economic changes, and now we've had this technology revolution as well. It's a lot going on in a short period of time. So let's rewind the tape. Yeah. What did revenue and revenue operations look like then?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the effects of COVID, at least on the RevOps side, right? So I think we all felt the kind of traumatic experiences that were involved in that, and I once in a while would kind of get a quick memory of what it was like, and it was tough. But I think that
yeah, like your kids do. Like, how old were your kids at that time?
Were like 2 and 3.
Yeah. So like, I remember daycare shut down, and all of a sudden here I was, just doing a daycare duty during the day, and then trying to cram my work down a couple hours.
A 4-year-old nursery on Zoom.
Yeah,
it was an absurd thing. Like, how is that going to work? From a company perspective, to make everything work together, right? So we no longer had the ability to go from one desk to the next to make sure, hey, did you get that spreadsheet I sent you? Did it, was it done correctly, right? So the need for tooling actually increased a lot. And, one of the byproducts of trying to make sure that the whole world didn't collapse was that they kind of turned on the tap in terms of easy money. And so valuations, investment, budgets ballooned. And so it fed this machine of, these little everybody got their own point solution, and they were the market was kind of flooded with them, positioning themselves as like best in class for a very kind of narrow piece of the puzzle. And, people's tech stacks got huge, right? And who does it land on to ensure that all works together? It's RevOps. So I think that in parallel with that, we saw the role of RevOps becoming all that much more important. We remember that it went from kind of this unknown role to the number one most sought after role on LinkedIn and all these things. So their importance became greater, but there was a lot of challenge. And, so we had that with the work from home and the low interest rates. And then the effect of that tap being closed, there was many effects, but one that's relevant is that there was a massive fine-tooth comb that went through budgets and what we're paying for. there is, and it continues to be, kind of this consolidation of tools where the point solutions are getting ripped out, and we're focusing on platforms and ensuring that platform can get you 75% of the way there. If there's things that need to be done on the side with integrations and APIs, again, that creates the importance of the RevOps role even that much more. And that's, I think, one of the things we're seeing.
Yeah. And so, as you made that last point, I was thinking about how AI was maybe playing into that, or I don't know, helping, hindering that, kind of where that fits into the mix. So if we've gone through this evolution of bloated tech stack point solutions for every different things, and as a revenue operator, you are responsible for integrating those, deploying those, making sure that data is being passed back and forth correctly, that you're using the data that comes out of those. So now you've got to unwind and take all of those things out and your skill set. Let me evaluate all of these maybe bigger pieces of technology that we have to see where I can get decent enough coverage to fulfill the needs that maybe this very specific thing was doing. And so you kind of go through that exercise. And now we're in this environment of a lot of AI tooling technology being deployed, bought, purchased, getting integrated into different products. So as I say that, are we moving back to what you mentioned when COVID was rolling around, of like everybody buying more stuff? Because I know I have seen companies be like, hey, we have an AI budget, right? And I don't think they even really know what that necessarily means or what they want to do with it, but that's what people are able to spend against. So where are we now with AI?
Yeah.
How does that fit in?
We certainly are not back in, kind of free money to buy tooling. I do think that there's now becoming a carve out for AI. We need AI. And I think your observation is correct. They probably don't know what that means or who gets that budget and where it goes. I think a lot of that is coming from investors or boards. We got it. We need AI, but no one quite knows what that means. And really, one of the most surprising things that I've observed is that the uptake of AI as kind of a sidekick amongst the RevOps folks that I've been talking to has not been as widespread as it has been amongst certainly the kind of marketing people that I talk to.
Yeah.
I think the very very obvious use cases are being deployed for sales reach and recording that are kind of the big players, right? Gong being one of them, are trying to take that budget, right? And they're making platform if you kind of look at their overall offering.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're going back to a world where you get to have your own point solution, because while everyone really wants to use AI, there's also a lot of hesitancy. I think the larger the organization, the more concerned they are about the risks that they perceive. Humans make errors, but the scale of an error with an AI that's handling so much is kind of unknowable, and there's a lot of fear there. And I think that might be one of the reasons, but I see your point, and I think that these platforms are starting to offer that AI in order to get that budget. If you look at Salesforce, for example, and basically rebranding themselves as Agentforce.
Yeah. How do you've gone through all these interviews, you've done the podcast, right? Like you said, you've talked to a lot of people throughout these different changes. So, I think one of the other popular things, maybe the things that you can hear often, people love to proclaim in their own little echo chamber about things being dead or making these huge impacts, right? And so I know, it's like AI's coming for everyone's job, and the latest one I've seen is like AI is gonna make it so that, like software companies don't exist because every company is going to be their own software company, right? And just build their own stuff. So where do you stand on that? Is that one of those things that you've seen or heard from, like people that you've interviewed, that you've talked to? Where do people stand on this whole build versus buy thing? Because going back to the point you mentioned before, I think there are some very obvious use cases for AI that are a great fit. Call recordings and information that you can process there, and what you do with it, the follow-up is a good one. Obviously, like sales outreach, we can talk about the effectiveness of that and how, again, you talked about errors at scale. That's actually a great example, right, of one there. You can see how it can fit into certain parts of what you're doing already, but again, it doesn't, I don't know, it's not replacing that stuff. So where do you land on that whole build versus buy, rip versus, rip and replace sort of
it's
aspect?
actually, I've shifted my conversations lately, particularly around this topic. My gut feeling is that eventually we do get to kind of that place you described where companies, there's no software. I don't think it's going to be anytime soon, but it seems somewhat inevitable. However, that is not borne out in the conversations I have with people that are, in ops roles. I have not seen any indication that they're heading in that direction, more aggressive building versus buying, so to speak. I know that kind of counters what I said previously, but in reality, I think companies are more just kind of saying, deal with just getting 70% of the functionality that you want. However, it seems obvious that it is the direction that we would go. Being a non-technical person and using things like Cursor and vo.dev and bolt.new, the ability to be technical and build those solutions without needing developer resources, it's really unbelievable. The world of those point solutions could easily be, taken over by an internal function that kind of builds those tools. Whether or not RMs are going to be built internally, the very popular example that causes a lot of argument back and forth is that of Klarna. And I think recently their CEO kind of came out, and I don't know if he was walking things back. Klarna, I think they do e-commerce, like buy now, pay later kind of stuff. Like a year ago, came out and said that they've basically kind of gotten rid of a lot of their enterprise software and replaced it with AI and kind of knowledge graph databases. And that included their Salesforce, Workday, and like those kind of what we assume are irreplaceable solutions. And that kind of kicked off a firestorm of they're just trying to make buzz because they're going to IPO. I think that is the direction we will eventually go. I think it's going to take a long time to get there.
Yeah. One of the things I look at to, I don't know, I guess it's countering the way you feel about this is you don't know what you don't know. Whether you're building stuff around a certain process or thing that you want to accomplish, I mean, you are doing that for your specific, right? So you don't know what other companies, competitors, other people like you are doing that may be more efficient, more effective, right? Produce better results. So now you're going to build something and scale something around this process and outcome you want to drive that is not the most efficient or most effective. And so the reason why companies are built around software or technology products is because they become experts on solving that specific problem. And they will not magically make you better, right, at things, but they will help get you there. I think I want to go back, though, to the interesting thing you said, which is AI, technology, and adoption. We think of people in RevOps and all the tooling, all the systems that they typically will own and manage. It seems like they would be the ones that are like, yeah, I want to go out and build some shit, right? Like, let me go do that. But you actually said it seems like more conversations are around maybe buying and getting the coverage that you need. So why do you think that is? Any ideas on why that would be?
So, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the sample I've been engaging with in the comments below or whatever, people say I'm full of shit. I'm not sure. But just my observation, it does seem that there is hesitancy or kind of unsure if this is more of a fad or that maybe we've been down this road before. We don't want the kind of bonanza of tooling that we had, which was such a pain in the neck to deal with. And that if we're going to do it, let's do it right. And maybe the use cases in which this is really useful haven't quite kind of been made available, right? So, I think that people are looking to solve very specific problems. There's a myriad of them. Whereas AI often is kind of a Pandora's box, and you have to guide it to solving those problems. And ensuring that that process is repeatable at scale is still a challenge, right? There's that error rate that you're going to get. I think people are trying to solve that with agentic and different kind of things. But I haven't seen an appetite from, revenue leaders that their revenue data or revenue organizations are going to be the testing ground for those things, which is interesting because I love experimenting. I have like 5 different windows open right now with different AI solutions, just like trying to figure stuff out. And if anything, just to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And so I think actually with RevOps that revenue operators are uniquely positioned with AI technology coming to the forefront of things now to be call it like the catalyst, the owner of a lot of those things. Because if you think about what revenue operations has been previously, it's been this intersection of people, process, and technology kind of all coalescing into the RevOps function. And who better to know where and how to best deploy AI to make things more efficient, more effective than someone in RevOps, right? They know where the bodies are buried, right? Where the skeletons in the closets are. They know where things are barely being held together, whether it's with people or manual processes or technology in the mix. I think operators are in this really, really unique place to own that and be, right, that really strategic asset for their businesses going forward. So with all the people that you've talked to, podcasts, what you now turned into the book, what are those things that folks are using AI for, that operators are using AI for today? And then to follow that up, what are maybe some things that you see that may not be a broad kind of trend, but where there might be opportunity and people should start thinking about using AI?
Yeah. So I think that whenever I do bring this up, there are the kind of what might be the low-hanging fruit use cases. Call recordings and insights, the notes in the CRM, things like that. And then there's obviously the sales outreach stuff. And I think RevOps, probably the people I talk to kind of understand that a lot of that is schlock. And maybe that's part of their hesitancy that I'm seeing in terms of kind of embracing AI as this critical piece. Some of the more interesting things that I've heard, which, again, are more the exception than the rule, as far as I've observed, is things like creating an AI agent that assesses a prospect, like pre-screens it, for this sales motion, we need to ensure that this and this type of company, and we need to have on the CRM record indications that they are this and that kind of motion or whatever. And he kind of built an agent that before a sales call happens, it goes out and does this and fills it in the CRM for the sales rep, because he found that like the majority of these SDRs were actually spending the majority of their time doing that research as opposed to actually calling. And so he built an agent that took away that and kind of opened things up for them to be more productive in where they could be effective. So that is a really interesting and valuable use case, but not one that really didn't get a lot of other examples like that, which was surprising because that's the kind of thing that I would expect more of. I do think that as we go forward, the trend of consolidation and focusing on platforms means that these platforms are incorporating AI into the user interface, and it will become kind of the core interface, right? So I think that maybe is a little further down, but increasingly we're going to be relying on the AI aspect of a platform for its core functionality, as opposed to maybe having to write SQL, working with an agent in your CRM to get a report or whatever. I know that our roadmap is very heavily focused on incorporating this kind of agentic AI integration. I think that the platform play is going to continue. We're just going to have more AI functionality within those platforms.
Yeah. And go back to the Klarna example that we mentioned. One thing I'll bring up where they kind of ripped all this stuff out. I know one thing that I've experienced myself firsthand with this new technology, and I think I've heard from others, is start off by solving a specific problem that you have with AI as the solution. So one of the examples for me was leveraging, I needed to know where all of our community members were based so that when we did local in-person events, I could invite those specific people instead of having to email, for example, my entire community member base. So that was like the use case that I started, right? And then all of a sudden, as new problems arose, or as these like manual processes where previously I was like maybe like the in between clicking buttons, moving things around, I was like, hey, I bet you I can solve that with X. And then I went in and I did it. And so now I started with this one specific thing, and I've kind of worked backwards to now remove a lot of this other stuff that was going on. And I think that's been one way, at least to be efficient and effective with it, is not look at everything you have today and be like, well, see ya. Let's just rip all this stuff out and like throw this other stuff in the mix. Add the thing, add AI, and then kind of work backwards and see what you can remove and start to ask those other questions, right? Which maybe are, hey, do I need a CRM? There's probably a whole lot of things you'll need. Yes. But you can at least start asking yourself that question. And if you work backwards like that, I think you'll find a lot more that you can probably eliminate and get rid of. But that leads me to my next question, which is, you brought up even in that agentic example of like, hey, our SDRs were previously spending all this time doing this. Now they don't have to, so they can do the stuff that's most valuable, which is typically human to human interaction. I think that's kind of this next phase. A lot of the narrative now is around how AI can support humans doing the things that humans should ultimately do. And even in the subtitle of your book talking about rethinking revenue for the digital age, I guess that's where my next question is, how does the human aspect, the human element fit into this? Because we started this conversation back on COVID, right? Where it's like everyone's at home, we're just spending time with ourselves and our families. Now we're in this spot where we're all still working remotely or hybrid, and AI is apparently coming for our jobs, but then not really coming for our jobs. And it's supposed to kind of support us, but also eliminate some of this other stuff. So how does the in-person human to human piece play into what's next?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really talk about the human aspect, but there were many of my conversations around people in leadership in which they've had to grapple with the human aspects of what we were all going through and what we continue to go through. There were a few sales leaders in particular that were part of the conversation, and some of the challenges around expectations of, let's say, certain generation of sellers around, their responsibilities and what a workplace is, and what they're going to be held towards, and that challenge is like, and how to deal with it. And I think that is something that a lot of companies out there are dealing with still. Some are doing it more gracefully than others, but how does the human to human element going forward? I think right now that's what we have going for us is human to human, right? So until sentience, until the singularity, that's the one thing we got. So I think it's going to increasingly be important and be front and center. Even companies that have AI doing their cold calling, eventually that gets passed to a human to actually do the conversation. And so those are going to become increasingly important. I think community events like RevOpsAF, for example, and the community of RevOps Co-op in general, where you can get this kind of unbiased thing and you don't have to worry about the responses that you're going to get being, having those very clear red flags of having been written by AI, like the double dash or whatever. I think we all kind of have that filter now. And so it's refreshing, and hopefully will continue. I think those in-person real experiences are at a premium and will continue to be until we are all out of a job and living off of universal basic income. But until then, community is important.
Yeah. And I know I've seen it through the community as well. And maybe that's the point of a lot of this, is that the human connection is where tons of value in new technology like artificial allows us to eliminate the things that were maybe previously keeping us away from interacting together, and that it can actually make those human in-person connections that much more valuable. We've got our in-person conference, RevOpsAF, that you mentioned, but even since the start of the year, which is, as we sit down here, it's middle of March 2025. I mean, we've had a lot more of these like smaller group in-person events and like dinners in New York City or San Francisco or small group happy hours, right? And it's because there's demand and appetite from people for that,
Yeah.
right? And hopefully they're all able to do those things more often and frequently because technology is helping them eliminate the manual button clicking that was previously maybe keeping them away at night. And now they're able to actually like spend an hour and a half at a happy hour meeting some other friends. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me, right? And if those SDRs you mentioned before, instead of doing a bunch of manual research, can now actually spend more time on the phone, calling people, talking to people. I don't know. That seems like a pretty good.
It's a whole existential conversation.
Oh, look, look at that.
I think that, the positive potential. There's a cone of possibilities, right, of where we could go, and that's, I think, on the more kind of positive side.
Yeah.
A whole world of dystopian stuff that you can think of where it goes. There's many movies about it, but I don't think there's any reason to assume that it's all over for humans and the human capital has no value, because I don't know what tomorrow's going to be, but there are things that we have that we can bring to the table that AIs can't. And the human connection is one of them, and appealing to a certain level of empathy and being genuine is we have yet to really see that be something they can replicate, though I'm sure it'll eventually get there.
Yeah.
And so those are the things to really double down on.
Yeah. All right, my friend. Well, I have one more question for you before I let you go. So, and I don't think any AI could answer this for you. I don't know, maybe it could. But my question is, we talked a little bit about our conference, RevOpsAF. You and the DealHub crew are going to be there. You were last year in San Diego. This year it's in New Orleans. You'll be there again. And so, we'll have 350 people there in New Orleans. And I want you to imagine that you are the opening keynote speaker for RevOpsAF in New Orleans, and that we call your name, right? Everyone in the audience stands up. They're all cheering, Mark Lerner. What would be the walk-up song that you would play as you came up onto stage to deliver the opening keynote for RevOpsAF?
Yeah, I don't know if we asked me this exact kind of question during a webinar, but it would be Enter Sandman by Metallica for sure.
All right. Well, Mark Lerner is the Sandman. All right, my friend. Well, I appreciate you giving us some time, dropping some knowledge on the book. Congratulations on that as well. Everyone can go out and snag it at DealHub.io on their website, RevOps Rewired, Rethinking Revenue for the Digital Age. Well, Mark, that's all I got for you, my friend, so I will let you run. But again, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOps safe, y'all.